Hello and welcome to another 7 Days to Die video. I've been wanting to take a sneak peek at an overhaul mod I recently learned about, called Forsaken Trail. This mod completely changes how the game is approached. It focuses greatly on survival, exploration, and overcoming the absolute complete horrors of the apocalypse. And there will be plenty of horrors because I will be playing on Insane Nightmare. Because I'm playing for a little bit of fun and exploration, I've softened the experience up with no death penalties and double XP. If I end up doing a full playthrough, I'll turn on the death penalties. For now, I will try to avoid cheese tactics with dying. If I get any diseases or injuries, I will deal with them to the best of my ability while also trying to avoid death. And so begins the torture. The game begins with you being born. You can determine what stats and items you start with by picking your class and allocating your stats. I went with Weary Adventurer because that allows me to pick and choose what I can start with. I went clubs for clubbing, shotguns for shotgunning, and salvaging because a day 1 wrench is truly special. I also wanted an edge on medicine because I will be needing a lot of it. I finished with tool making. Because the zombies will be unreasonably fast, I allocated my stats so that I would be strong and agile. This character does not accurately reflect my real-world attributes. My acumen would be a solid 3 if that were the case. My journey begins with me waking up in the middle of nowhere. I must have gotten absolutely drunk to wind up out here, but that is in the past, because now it's time to destroy some plants. I'm only glad I was smart enough to bring MRE rations and water on me before doing whatever I did before. The wilderness was bountiful with resources, and I was going to need plenty of everything. The tutorial gave me a deep dive on all the lootable plants and rocks, and I would eventually be turning these into food and laughably low-quality tools. This zombie was enjoying his fun camping trip, but he found my presence deeply offensive. The zombie failed to survive in this survival horror game, and I proceeded to destroy his life's work. I had earned this loot by right of conquest. Someday, I would load this singular 10-gauge shotgun shell into a shotgun. Things were going great, but that would be subject to change at any moment. I looted anything and everything I could, including the containers themselves. There would be plenty of loot for me to contain in these containers. I knew right away that the crawler zombie was a poor representation of how most encounters would play out going forward. I punched my hand straight through this stump in search of honey, because you can do things like that. Darlene would be my first taste of the true Insane Nightmare experience in this mod. I arranged for my club to collide directly into her face while she approached me at terrifying speeds. A true success story. Even though I was playing on Insane, the game permitted me to inflict full damage. The damage penalties of higher difficulties were not present in this mod. This was a change to a balance I quite enjoyed. The zombies wouldn't be total tanks in this mod. These camps are great places to loot when you're in the first 10 seconds of a playthrough, but even though Feral Sense was off, every zombie inside a POI would be immediately alerted to my presence if I got too close. I needed to be extremely careful on which areas I would approach. The bigger POIs were absolutely off limits. I placed myself on a steady diet of burned down buildings and abandoned campsites. Nerd pulling was also off limits. The game made absolutely sure that the zombies would receive a fair and equal opportunity to rip my guts open. Future combat encounters would demand a great deal of attention to the environment. In the wilderness, there's very few things to jump on to avoid getting hit. The pipe shotgun was excellent at inflicting violence and chaos wherever I pointed it. I'm genuinely impressed somebody was able to make the pipe shotgun a decent weapon. I'm also genuinely impressed somebody left clean water in this toilet. Tragically, I had no container to put this high-quality dookie water in, so I had to live without it. But I was getting distracted. The tutorial was generously offering me lessons on geology, and I was being disrespectful by killing the dead bodies that lived in a burned-down building. But then, I found another building. Zombie Crystal wanted to get to know me better, but my heart simply wasn't open. I let her down easy by bashing in her head. The building had absolutely no loot whatsoever, and I had punished myself severely by slightly burning precious daylight. This stupid biker provided a service by killing this pig for me. I had no viable tools for harvesting animals, so I bashed my wrench at a corpse to get a few bones for my bone knife. I attempted to tame this zombie dog to be my new pet, but my aggressive actions immediately killed it. I had achieved my first level up. My first perk choices were a no-brainer for me. I slammed a point into jogging and running, making me faster while also reducing stamina cost. Those two perks would allow me to eventually outrun insane nightmare zombies while also preserving stamina. I was planning to do a lot of running and walking. Walking also consumes a small amount of stamina. This becomes extremely noticeable after doing a few power attacks during combat. I was playing Stamina Simulator with the intention of winning. And for the sake of transparency, I should let it be known that I've already played a little bit of this mod before recording this playthrough. I wanted to get a grasp of the basics before really diving in. And I've also watched a few videos, which is how I even learned about the mod in the first place. So this playthrough is not 100% blind. The majority of day 1 would be spent on the tutorial. Even though this game takes place in the very late stages of the apocalypse, I required education on plants and rocks. But things had been going well so far. I found a cozy tier 1 POI inhabited by extremely violent zombies. It had a nice fence and a tower, which I found to be ideal living conditions. Thanks to the Fun Pimp's patented AI pathing, the zombies had caught themselves on a fence. I only needed to apply a minimal amount of problem-solving skills to kill the zombies through a hole. One of the zombies dropped treasure, and I robbed his corpse to find a new quest. Then I applied perk points to my clubs. As far as I'm aware, quests can only be obtained through looting. This further incentivizes exploration and violence, which I enjoy a lot. This zombie only slightly hit me in the face and I immediately got infected. I wrapped my shame with a first aid kit and jammed some honey into my stupid face. But this was only a small price to pay for a decent living space. The area was clear and I was free to infest the POI for my own gain. The loot generously granted me a few cans and jars, which is handy for water collection, but my survival skills were still in development. I was still too stupid to make an axe. I started bashing this box with my wrench and found a few random materials that would come in great handy later on. I had now established myself as a somewhat competent fighting force. I celebrated by picking corn and goldenrod flowers. One thing I came to learn very quickly is that you can never have too much food and honey. This bird threatened to gouge my eyes out, and this zombie was too stupid to open a simple door. I was now free to loot this house, but first I needed to interrupt this zombie couple's camping trip. And you already know I was going to put more points into running and jogging. I was unimpressed by the loot from this car, but I hadn't realized at the time how useful iron plates were going to be. I returned to the house and demonstrated proper tool usage by breaking down this door with a wrench. This innocuous bag would provide me one of the best items in the game, a can opener. I also found another quest called Extermination. It was set to Survivalist difficulty, which I'm assuming is the equivalent of a tier 5 or maybe a tier 4. I excitedly skipped over it. I applied force to the zombie's brain, but the other zombie informed me he was radioactive by spitting in my eyes. Radiation is a real bastard in this mod. I used my precious water to treat my burning face. Being spat on is a bit like being set on fire. I was astonished to find that this gold bar sells for a solid 1,000 shekels. I sure hope I wouldn't need this gold bar for anything important. These zombies absolutely did not take kindly to my intrusion. Their teamwork was absolutely flawless. The radiation had completely shut down my brain, and I was too incompetent to pull out my shotgun and finish the fight. I paid for it by being devoured by the United States military. A fun side effect of not setting a bed down is you spawn exactly where you died, next to the zombie that killed you. I had a rematch. The soldier somehow got smaller after eating me, but he asserted his short king status by hitting me for half of my freaking health. I was then assaulted by a basketball player, and he cleverly weaved his head slightly to avoid my shotgun shots. And that's when I realized this journey was going to have several obstacles for me to overcome. But my journey took me far and wide, and amazingly, I found a water container that held safe water. Even my stupid brain knows not to drink dirty or gross water, but even clean water has a small chance of giving you dysentery. Safe water was the best of the best. My brain decided to mark this area. I allocated points into heavy lifting, a perk that would quickly prove to be extremely useful. And just like Afterlife, this mod has a weight system. Your greed can slow you down. Greed will get a man killed. I obtained my first learning magazine. A vehicle would be a nice thing to unlock in the early game, but I was not fooled, because there's another way to gain crafting skill points. And while it hurts to destroy the great literary works of the apocalypse, I was going to need blueprints to progress adequately. Blueprints are made into research papers. Research papers unlock crafting skills just like magazines do. They're very powerful in the early game. I can increase my knowledge by several percentage points with this one small trick. But spooky scary time was fast approaching, and even though nighttime would have absolutely no effect on the difficulty whatsoever, I still like to use nighttime to cower at my base and work on crafting related things. I spent the night cleaning my dirty dishes. I concluded the tutorial by placing my bed. I was now educated in all matters relating to the apocalypse. This also granted me some perk points. I added a point into research, which unlocked the ability to craft research papers in any crafting skill of my choice. I cannot presume to know the intricate details of a mod I've only barely started playing, but one thing I very quickly learned in playtesting is that a few cooking research papers can go a very long way. Low quality foods will give you various afflictions that make your life exponentially harder. One might consider becoming a master chef, because good food is healthy for you and bad food is unhealthy for you. I now have the location of a trader marked on my map. I got a good roll on the distance because my last trader was 3 kilometers away on my test world. But I also needed wood to make a table. This table would allow me to do work. On the work table, I began ripping entire blocks to pieces with my bare hands. This was my best source of sawed wood and nails. I swung my hammer at the air because that's what a normal and healthy person does during the apocalypse. The work table was completed, and it opened up a world of opportunity for me to craft more things. And because I picked tool making as my starting skill, I had been born with precision tools, and I immediately placed it in the work table. I did some frolicking in the forest and ruined a great number of zombie camping trips. The zombies were a deadly force that demanded respect, but they were not experts in surviving in the wilderness. This was the most overpowered luggage loot I've ever seen in my life. The wire cutters were extremely valuable, but because I was profoundly stupid, I did not pick them up, and this has been incredibly painful for me to look back on this footage. And now that I'm seeing this footage, I'm going to need to head back in that direction. Skipping over the wire cutters made me feel lucky. I felt lucky enough to swing a club straight into a party girl's face. But I was feeling extraordinarily lucky because I was now entering a trader compound, and this trader was Trader Hugh. The trader compounds are extremely modest, but I was blessed to have the literal weapons vendor as my first trader. The weapons were staggering, but I obviously could not afford them because I was literally on day 2 of the playthrough. But I did manage to buy a set of pans. I picked up a new supplies quest. It was scavenger difficulty, which is the perfect difficulty for my pathetic existence. I received instructions to find the supplies, and then I needed to grab the supplies and return it to the trader. It was the perfect job for an unskilled laborer. Things were going great. Everything was coming together, and even the tree stumps had a nice little surprise for me. After being blown into several pieces, I now had a choice. I chose to spawn near my bed. But the idea of spawning near my bed was apparently open to interpretation. One could argue that the wasteland is definitely near my bed when you consider the size of the entire planet. This radiated, mutated zombie determined that my existence was unnecessary for the planet. Discharging a firearm in the wasteland would come with severe hazards to my health. But I was an exceptional runner. The insane nightmare zombies were subject to eating my dust. My game stage was a casual 303, while I was only level 6. But I was faster than everything. So long as I sprinted like a madman, I would come out of this a better person. Except I couldn't outrun this dire wolf, and he took a good chunk of my face off with his teeth. This crawler top zombie is genuinely terrifying, and my existence ended when this feral white intercepted my skull. I may have been dead, but I still had the wisdom to spawn on my bed this time. It's time to stop fooling around. I needed to make progression. I needed to go out and actually do things with my life, so I set out to do my quest. When I arrived at the quest, I realized the error of my ways, because you see, I thought the name Supplies meant that it was a fetch quest. I thought I was meant to fetch the supplies inside a POI, but what it actually meant is that I would be digging up the supplies. Digging is a process, but that's just how it goes when you have no perk points into digging. I didn't know it at the time, but I would be needing plenty of clay for a future building project, so this buried supplies mission wasn't a total wash. I got pretty lucky and managed to find the chest without triggering any spawns. But looting the chest would, of course, trigger the spawn of 3 nightmare speed zombies that were barreling towards me. The zombies were dangerous, but they were also stupid. Jumping on cars proved to be the healthiest decision I've ever made in my miserable life. Zombie Anna unleashed a jump attack and injected a virus into my body, but I injected perk points into more research. And the janky hitboxes of the game cost me several health points in this little conflict. The buried supplies had supplied me with some nifty items, such as a perk book and a pistol. I'll never complain about having more guns. I turned in the quest for a small sum of old world cash, and I made my way back to my small military base camp, killing every zombie I saw. Even though I was on double experience, I could tell that even on 1x, the leveling process was very fast. And now that I had a few points into running and jogging, I was determined to max out research as soon as possible. I did plan to put more points into running and jogging later on, so I could manage stamina much easier. Cars continued providing me useful mats, and Giant Steve donated his life, giving me the last experience I needed to level once again. And I lied about maxing out research. I did more jogging and more running. I noticed I had some mild food poisoning. This would be a continuing problem in the early game and is a major reason why I like to unlock cooking skills as early as possible. And while I am absolutely dumb enough to eat spoiled canned food, I needed to scrap it for a dirty can. Zombie Joe pointed out to me that I was still rusty at dealing with nightmare speed zombies. The snakes are genuinely awful, just like they are in real life, and in this mod, they too are on nightmare speed. I returned to base, and I was slightly concerned that leaving the area with a full crafting output was possibly having a negative effect on my work table. But I treated myself to a wholesome meal of educational material. I stuffed a great deal of goldenrod flowers into several cans and proceeded to make tea. My mild food poisoning had progressed into an aggressively severe food poisoning, which took away my stats and made me feel heavier. The enemy of the apocalypse is not always a zombie, it is sometimes the tiny microbes that infest your food. I eagerly awaited for my tea to finish, so I could shove all of it down my face. I was going to need a lot in order to treat the poisoning. Slowly but surely, my food poisoning torture had been reduced to a mild agony. Goldenrod tea is truly special in the early game. I did general chores, such as washing my dishes and scratching my head over my future perk plans. But playtime was over. I had unlocked the forge. I used my imagination and projected a smelter blueprint onto the world. The blueprint told me what materials I needed, and I needed a lot of material. The forge is definitely something that needs to be earned. I had now surpassed the point I had reached in my playtest world. I would now be almost totally blind going forward. But now I felt I had a pretty good grasp on the very early game. But as I learned the mod, I'm sure I would still be making bad decisions that I would regret later on. I ate enough research papers to level up, and I was now 8 out of 10 on the research perk. The final points would allow me to craft 3 papers per craft, which will come in very nice handy. If there's one perk to max out as soon as possible, it's definitely research. I began the next morning by raiding this emergency vehicle. The loot continued to give me medical-related items, which made me feel good. But the game was also sending me a little message. I hadn't thought about it at the time. I hadn't thought about the reasons why a game would give me so much medication. This coyote apparently came from the dinosaur age due to his enormous size. The bastard had managed to eat several chunks out of my body, leaving me mutilated and bleeding. It's a good thing I found those bandages. But I had encroached on this barrel crawler's territory, and he assumed control of my destiny. I had the idea of keeping my bed in my pocket. I would now spawn on top of where I died, which was shamefully cheesy. However, I was still determined to keep my death count as low as possible. But I needed to change my approach. I was dying to death too many times. Even though most overhaul mods aren't balanced around Insane Nightmare, I still wanted to play on these unreasonable settings. This businessman slightly tapped me on the shoulder, and I began bleeding profusely. These vultures are absolute bastards, and I want all of them to die. But the good news is, I was now maxed out on research. This house distracted me, and my exploration was rewarded with this fascinating piece of jewelry. This thing added a point to my finesse, which was very welcome given it was my highest stat. I was going to be wearing it forever and ever. I'm assuming the pendants are a replacement for the plus stat mods from the base game. As it turns out, I will be needing all the finesse I can get because I was going mountain climbing. And I would be lying to you if I told you I wasn't completely scared out of my mind. Mountains tend to have animals on it. Animals that are big and scary and do lots of damage and take lots of damage. Oh, and apparently these traps are a thing in this mod. I duly noted that one. Kids, always carry a shovel on you, just in case you fall into a horrifying death trap. Ah, and that's just a massive wandering horde. Yes, I'll just be leaving then. My perks into running and jogging paid off once again. You wouldn't think a rotting corpse could run as fast as a cheetah, but that was the world I chose to live in. I took a moment to admire the geography of these random generated worlds. The devs really did a good job here. It actually feels like I'm stranded in the mountains, surrounded by bloodthirsty dead people. And that's just a bear. Well, I'll be leaving forever then. I adamantly refuse to be bear food. This completely random backpack provided me a new quest type called Extermination. It was set on the easiest difficulty, perfect for a weak and feeble fool like myself. I had come to discover a new city. A new city means employment opportunities. Employment opportunities means new unspeakable horrors awaiting me. My next 2 points went into clubs and vigor. Vigor increased my health points, which allowed me to suffer slightly longer before being eaten to death. I needed to adopt a new dog, so I proceeded to invade the vet clinic. It's one of the easier tier 2 POIs that I'm aware of. I committed violence through a tiny hole in this door, and I was suddenly hit with the lucky buff. It does exactly what you think it does. I continued to be violent through this tiny hole in the door. These doors are enormously useful on these horrible settings. Slowly, I was learning to take advantage of the aggro mechanics in this mod. Since every single zombie that is spawned in will activate, it meant that they would be stuck behind fences and doors that contained them. I needed to take advantage of this. At this point, I was also learning that it's not necessary to do a power attack so often, since a lot of the basic zombies just die in 2 to 3 hits anyway. And I also really enjoyed that you could find perk books that gave you perks for free. Maintenance is especially useful. If you told me ammunition piles were good sources of ammo in 7 days to die, I would have called you crazy. But I'm in the middle of an Afterlife playthrough, so I had to readjust to ammo piles giving good amounts of ammo again. I tragically put a point into toughness, which would have been enormously useful on these settings, but the perk is either bugged or the developer played a cruel joke on me. Despite having points in it, the bonus stayed at 0%. I abused my luck buff on this lockbox and ooh, a structural brace mod. That's enormously useful in this mod, where items break permanently if you fail to repair them. The iron boots were also welcomed, but I did feel a little concerned about any possible movement penalties from armor. And then I found another finesse pendant, which would sell for a generous $2,000. But I was getting heavy fast, and I was very far from home. Inventory is a real bastard. I never expected the vet clinic to be the go-to place for armor, but I was happy to see a military helmet and a hide chest piece. But is wearing military gear considered stolen valor? This radiated zombie stole my courage, and I almost panicked. He gave me a bloody nose because I was too stupid to reload my shotgun. I covered my shame with bandages. The towns feel genuinely terrifying. It's both metaphorically and literally like walking through a minefield. The wrong step could bring catastrophic consequences, and there were actual mines. My brain had gotten the idea of triggering the quest without first clearing the POI out. This seemingly doubled the zombie population. My cheese tactics failed to effectively inflict violence, and I kept forgetting that firing the extremely loud shotgun drew a great deal of attention to my location. Things were getting ugly fast, but I needed to stand strong. My pipe baton was determined to smash as many zombies as possible, but with no stamina and 8 billion zombies chasing after me, things were looking grim. My stupidity forced me to bring out the bone knife instead of my pistol, and I proceeded to die horribly. The zombies began eating the ground. I used dark magic and witchcraft to bring myself back to life. I was still in the same POI, but my quest had failed. My efforts were not completely wasted, however. I came away with some perk books and research papers. And now I was encumbered. My movement speed and jump height were significantly reduced. The zombie pathing is at its absolute worst on nightmare speed. But at least I had some perk points, and they both went into lifting. I highly recommend this perk. Since I brutally and miserably failed my first quest, I wanted to check out the new extermination quest that was nearby. I noted that the quest area took place on perfectly flat ground with absolutely nothing to get the zombies caught on. Now seemed like a good idea to take some fort bites. I hit the marker and was immediately swarmed by several zombies. I was a soft and feeble human pitted against an extremely agitated pile of dead living things. I knew I had only the smallest hope of finishing this off, but I tried anyway. The zombies demonstrated excellent teamwork and leadership skills, and I failed to manage my stamina and my nerves. I proceeded to die horribly. And then I spawned into a Big Mama and she immediately slit my throat. After being thoroughly shafted several times over, I was finished with this area. Nighttime was approaching, and I needed to get home anyway. I threw my stuff into my random pile of luggage and backpacks and baked some more research papers. I was ready to unlock some medicine and some tool crafting, along with more resources and melee weapons. I meditated with my brain, and my brain decided to make my body better at jumping. If only it were this easy in real life. My first combat encounter of day 4 was against this tiny zombie with absolute bastard pathing. I was only getting slightly better at dealing with Insane Nightmare. Some progress is better than no progress. I would eventually learn to take advantage of my movement speed and develop methods to separate zombies from their pack. I returned to Trader Hugh and persuaded him to buy my fake jewelry. I bought a new shovel because I was going to need to start digging soon. This pig sacrificed himself so I could harvest its animal skin. I came home and discovered I was violently crapping my pants, but thankfully I had cooked up some yellow tea. Deadly diseases and viruses become small matters when you can just chug a bunch of goldenrod teas. These crawler zombies make me want to rip my brain out of my head, I swear. I bled for the 20th time in this playthrough. I seriously considered putting some points into coagulation, which theoretically helps with bleeding, I think. Maybe. Possibly. Somebody's pet dog greeted me, and I politely and kindly started bleeding again. And I met my new adversary, which was a crawler zombie once again, and he absolutely outplayed me. I wondered if I would come back as a zombie myself if I died a certain amount of times. If this mechanic exists, I was probably getting close to discovering it. I decided my damage wasn't high enough, so I increased my competency in the art of bashing clubs into dead people. But damage was not my problem. My failure to readjust my strategy in a timely manner was what really got to me. But one good thing about being in the city is getting all the dumb zombies caught on various objects. Vehicles were my best and only friends in the apocalypse. But for all my troubles, the video game had gifted me a blue quality nail gun. And of course, I was trapped in a trailer with several zombies trying to beat down the door. And no, I am absolutely not doing an infestation set on insane difficulty. I may not have any death penalties, but I'm still trying to minimize deaths. It's time to take a peek into this airdrop. And even though the search time started at 15 seconds, I was genuinely surprised I wasn't jumped by 50 zombies. The airdrop had no real crazy loot, but I do think having them on is a little overpowered. I introduced myself to Steve by caving his face into his head, and I wasted my perk points into being a better doctor and an armor wearer. This random abandoned farm seemed friendly enough, but things got tricky when I failed to give my pipe baton the attention it needed. I am learning new things every day, and I learned that things will be destroyed permanently if their durability reaches 0. I left my spare pipe baton at home, and I was too lazy to go back. And I'm still amazed at how improved the pipe shotgun is compared to the vanilla gun. I only had 1 point into shotguns. And after clearing the POI, I was still too lazy to go back and retrieve my backup pipe baton. So I made a primitive club, Ooga Booga. This modest, humble loot crate was incredibly kind and considerate to me because it gave me the 30-06 sniper rifle. And it even threw in some steel just for fun. Perhaps someday I will acquire ammunition so that I can actually use the sniper rifle. My next mission was to do another buried supplies quest. The quest was also on the easiest difficulty, and while I took some bumps and bruises on my way there, I was impressed with how well the primitive club held up in combat. But having a stick for a weapon incentivized me to place more points into combat related perks. Oh, I guess I have to go over here. Glad it didn't fail me. And I need to write an angry letter to the person who invented birds. One thing I deeply appreciate about this mod is the grass doesn't get in the way of digging. However, the dirt does have 500 hit points, which prolongs the process anyway. I became a mole for the next few in-game hours. I don't know what it is about digging dirt that angers the zombies so much, but I was lucky to have somebody else's expensive property to stand on. And I suppose buried supplies are technically the easiest quest to do, but I began to experience anxiety as nighttime approached. But Insane Nightmare is as bad as it will ever get. Doesn't even matter whether it was night or daytime. My nighttime adversaries would be equally awful. I never hit the loot all button faster in my life, and I bolted for the car. Lucky for me, the magical loot box had a replacement pipe baton, and the quality was actually pretty decent. But things were getting ugly fast. These were the big zombies, and they had no problem jumping over the vehicle. All I could do was stand my ground while my face bled profusely. But just wrap your injuries in cloth and all wounds will magically heal. And I somehow didn't notice that my quest was literally less than 100 meters away from my base. Whoops. I had some farm fresh literature to eat, and I feasted to my heart's content. I was also blissfully unaware of the bug where workstation crafting bonuses don't apply when leaving the area. Life is good. It was already day 5, which meant tomorrow would be day 6, which meant the day after that would be day 7. But I had a plan for Horde Night. My plan was to wait until the absolute last minute to develop a real plan when Horde Night rolled around. It's how I usually approach Horde Night anyway. I'm not big on base building. I warmed up by looting random things in the wilderness. I saw this infestation quest and instantly passed. But now that I'm thinking about it, I probably could have taken on an infestation since ferals die in about 3 hits anyway, even on insane difficulty. I approached this nice wooden house, which was a house full of wood and nails. This was once the home of a loving family who all died horrible deaths, and now I was here, tearing it down. My next 2 points went into mining. I was preparing to start the long process of gathering. I was attempting to knock out the next set of the tutorial challenges. This would be the week 1 tutorial. This would educate me on how to rip apart wooden blocks and then reassemble them using imagination blueprints. I tried salvaging for the first time, and I will absolutely be putting points into salvaging very soon. I would describe it as a process. Also, salvaging gives you extremely useful resources, so points should be taken regardless. I stuffed the vending machine full of money and brought some forge tools in preparation for my upcoming forge. The work table had finished making nutritious research papers, and this was when I noticed the bug I mentioned earlier. More time was spent doing the week 1 tutorial. I was being educated on how to use blueprints to project my imagination. My brain compelled me to bash at rocks for the rest of the day. I was going to need plenty of rocks and dirt. My plan was to mash all of these materials together to craft my forge. But when I came back, my life was slightly inconvenienced by the presence of these 2 zombies inside my base. I didn't think about it at the time, but since I had no land claim block or bedroll, these zombies had morphed back into existence. Their sole purpose was to offer me experience upon their deaths. Progress was being made on my forge. The toughest material for me to get was definitely going to be the 100 mortar. This was because my brain was barely functioning at the time. I didn't know you could take a trowel and disassemble stone bricks for an extremely easy source of mortar and flagstone. The learning process is in fact a process. The glass would also have to be looted because I had no way of crafting glass. I would commit day 6 into exploration, conquest, and probably dying. But my brain was slowly and surely improving. I managed to take down this gigantic pharaoh without subjecting my face to brutal punishment. But I was hit with a double dose of food poisoning and dysentery. I'm pretty sure it was from my extremely low quality MRE rations, so I threw that bastard away and mashed several gallons of yellow tea into my face. This soldier kindly informed me that I wasn't playing the game good enough. I needed to straighten up. I was faster than the zombies. I was now able to jump higher than them as well. I needed to actually utilize my speed and agility. If my goal was to minimize my death counts, I needed to actually play the video game. But unfortunately, I still had some bad habits. I discharged this extremely loud firearm, and I learned that zombies will give you a great deal of attention when you're discharging extremely loud firearms. I swear to God, I'm going to max out bleed resistance when I get back to playing this mod. This luggage bag proved that looting luggage bags can be useful, and after engaging with several more zombies, I found the nifty barbed wire mod. Since my baton was considered a club, I could attach the mod to it. It was the zombie's turn to start bleeding. This bird decided that it was time for me to practice my baseball skills, and now I had gotten myself into a small situation. I failed to take advantage of my advanced athletic skills, and Tom proceeded to eat me right in the soft spot. It would be a while before I employed new strategies, and I continued to face take several zombies. I was already infected and fatigued, but I had promised myself that I wouldn't cheese my way out of these debuffs. And even though it seemed like I was throwing, I truly was playing to the best of my ability at the time. I just so happened to be absolutely incompetent. Now most of my armor was broken. This adequately explains why I was bleeding so much. I stuffed an entire bottle of vitamins to treat my fatigue, but the game disagreed with my treatment and continued torturing me with the debuff. It was time to level up tool crafting and maintenance. Despite my tremendous suffering, I was still making decent progress in the game. I went into this with a sort of Dark Souls mentality, and I've certainly died enough times to achieve this effect, but my armor situation was simply unacceptable. I returned to my work table to craft some armor research papers, and even though my armor crafting would be of questionable quality, I firmly adopted the stance that something was better than nothing. The bug had once again bitten my ass because I left the area, but during crafting time, I had been thinking strategically. I needed to apply more cowardice to my fighting. I needed to pick and choose my fights. I may be dumb, but the zombies are even dumber. Instead of fighting the entire zombie population in a POI, I would run out and separate them one or two at a time. It only makes perfect sense on these settings. Killing this dog added another animal hide into my bags, and it made me a better toolmaker. My brain was getting bigger. But I was feeling small again when this wandering horde came along to ruin my day. But once again, I was applying my strategy of fighting on my terms. The strategy of initiating conflict and running far distances had been working well so far. But I did occasionally experience interference when zombies would silently sneak up on me, and I experienced this a couple of times. This isn't a mod thing. Even in the base games, zombies will just be totally silent sometimes. But I had gone several minutes without dying, so my game of chicken had been evidently working for me. And now I was being permitted access to Tier 4 loot, when before I could barely take on a Tier 1. The ammunition was particularly generous in this POI, but the thing about a learning process is that it is a learning process. I failed to heed the warning signs, and I was immediately devoured by the fastest Big Mama I've ever seen in my life. I meditated on this while Big Mama was ripping my body to pieces with her teeth, but I woke up feeling great. Not only did I adopt a new strategy, but I had demonstrated my ability to actually apply it. Oh, you can actually loot candy in this mod. That's very nice. Unfortunately, I was way too stupid to open this loot box. It probably had a bunch of guns and ammo in it, but I will never ever know. Never ever ever. Until I make lockpicks at least. I allocated a few points into bleed and disease resistance. The bleeds were absolutely oppressive, and disease resistance probably doesn't hurt either. But the good news is that the bandages are very easily made, and they even heal for a small amount. I spent the rest of day 6 enhancing my brain power and ignoring the fact that Horde Night would be coming up very soon. But I did have plans to make a small amount of armor. The good old Senor Drogoz residence, my favorite home to infest on the Afterlife mod. I challenged myself to pick fights without dying horribly, and so far, it was serving me well enough. So long as I didn't get hit and discharge extremely loud firearms in the middle of a zombie-infested city, I would, in theory, be okay. Just pull a few at a time and run away like a brave coward. Sometimes I even surprised myself with how barely competent I was becoming. But occasionally, my face would receive punishment, but that's just how it goes on Insane Nightmare. Logic and reasoning dictated that I discharge several rounds from a loud firearm, but shockingly, I hadn't attracted any extra unwanted attention. And this POI is absolutely amazing for books. My education was making leaps and bounds. These zombies fail to grasp the concept of the Z axis, and I'm not sure how this biker got caught between the blocks like this. And dear God, this house has glorious cement. I could use this to finally create some mortar. I had successfully conquered a Tier 3 on Insane Nightmare and was rewarded with the final tire to craft my bicycle, as well as some iron plates to go along with it. I was rapidly becoming an expert toolmaker, and I celebrated this by pissing off all the zombies inside of this crackhead motel. I employed my viable strategy of divide and conquer, and then I learned that working stiff tool trucks are absolutely busted for crafting materials. But I made an even crazier discovery when I saw this police officer actually carried a gun. Police officers carrying weapons. Truly, this was a crazy world to live in. But being able to jump several blocks onto elevated surfaces would allow me to execute some extremely viable strategies. And I didn't know it at the time, but I had picked the absolute worst possible time to discharge this extremely loud firearm, because that was the exact moment a wandering horde had spawned in. Thank you, game, for allowing me to employ cheese tactics against a gigantic horde of zombies. The thing I enjoy about this mod is that the zombies are not absolute tanks, even on insane difficulty. This allows me to allocate perks into other things like running, jogging, and jumping, and even crafting things. And while I sometimes enjoy Insane Nightmare in the base game, it would force me to mash as many points into damage perks as possible. This removes all flexibility and compels me to follow an extremely linear path. This is not so much the case in Forsaken Trail. The game presented me an interesting point when it donated a pair of bicycle handlebars into my inventory. I definitely needed to start thinking about making a bicycle, but I had another problem coming up. It was day 7. The premise of 7 Days to Die is you have 7 days to live before you are required to die. I would be contending with a great deal of distractions tonight. Happy playtime was over. It's time to get into some serious planning. But due to a severe lack of planning and my remedial skill in construction, I very likely wasn't going to build a horde base. And even if I were to build a horde base, it probably would have been made out of wood anyway, and I got the sense, given the challenging nature of this mod, that horde knights were not going to be tame in the slightest, and I correctly guessed that wood was suboptimal for holding back the Blood Moon horde. I am something of a martial arts student. I've studied the ways of the flying rat, and I desired cheese. My last minute plan was to just stand on this roof and shoot at whatever zombies I could. And I double made sure the zombies had zero entry whatsoever to my little spot. I felt that my chances of survival was firmly in the zeros, but I was okay with that. Dying 10 more times was a small matter since I've already died 50,000 times anyway. And now it was time to face my doom. Horde Night opened up how it usually does, by throwing pecker birds at my existence. The birds threatened to annoy me, but I stumbled my way out of this conflict. The horde was making a large amount of noise downstairs. Some of them sounded like they were standing right next to me, but I tried my darndest to apply some amount of effort to fighting off the zombie horde. And just look at what's down there. Building a horde base was never going to be an option for me. There's like 5 zombie bears down there. There are a few things I should point out about my Horde Night experience. The game stage is scaled based on the difficulty setting, and since I was playing on Insane, my game stage was especially inflated. And the thing that made it exponentially more inflated was that this building is considered to be in the burnt forest biome. So of course, I was going to contend with the absolute horrors of the apocalypse. Whether intentional or not, I arranged my conditions to be at their worst. And yeah, it was intentional. And in between this screeching and screaming of 1,000 bloodthirsty horde, I decided to make a singular block of wood. It only had 800 hit points. Had I built a horde base, I would have absolutely been dead several times by now. But I was perfectly accustomed to the absolute chaos of Horde Night. These days, it is perfectly normal for mods to make Horde Nights as chaotic as possible. Even the base game made Horde Nights even crazier in a fairly recent update. A small part of me wished I could adopt these zombie bears and direwolves as my pets. I knew it would never ever happen in a mod like this, but I allowed myself to dream anyway. But that's enough of that. Horde Night was over. The problem was solved forever. Life could get back to normal. I was an avid runner. I had the perk points to prove it. I had no problems just running away from the unspeakable horrors that were waiting for me. Just run and never stop running. I had outwitted and outran the horde. Spending those points into running greatly improved my survivability. Except I couldn't outrun the dire wolf. The animals demonstrated excellent teamwork, and the zombie dog came in for the kill. But that was it. I survived a full week of insane nightmare on Forsaken Trail, and all it costed me was several deaths and a significant portion of my sanity. But I absolutely enjoyed myself. The mod is certainly complicated. I personally recommend doing a playtest first just to get a feel for the game. But I started having fun once I got a grasp of the early game. And as I understand it, the mod is a work in progress, and some things are still being balanced. Whenever I come out with a new episode, I'll be turning off airdrops and turning on death penalties. This episode was just a fun little sneak peek. I just had to give this mod a try once I learned about it. I went ahead and made some decent quality makeshift tools because I would be approaching a part of the game that would demand hard labor, and I needed the tools to gather somewhat efficiently. And with these new tools, I bashed away at several rocks and gathered a small amount of clay. These zombies slightly annoyed me by respawning, but I had everything I needed to make a land claim block. The land had officially been claimed. I now had a real home. Thank you all for joining me today. If you enjoyed me getting horribly mangled by the living dead, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you all, and take care.